And joining us now, we're pleased to have the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Ohio Congressman Mike Turner. Mr. Chairman, great to see you. We met in Munich when there was so much concern. Zelenskyy was warning exactly what would happen because of the holdup on the aid. And now he's saying that this is the reality. First of all, his concerns, you were at his speech last night, his concerns that his hands are tied. He didn't say that literally, but that he needs the ability to strike those jet bases, the Russian bases across the line. The White House has been concerned all along that this would escalate, be too provocative to Vladimir Putin. But what could be more provocative than what's been going on already?
Right. Right. We've seen Putin now intentionally hitting the children's hospital in Kyiv, and again, scores of people dying. Putin is, attacking civilians and not just, waging a war against Ukraine. But you and I were talking earlier about Zelenskyy's speech. I was at the Ronald Reagan Institute, and he made the point very clearly that air defense is not sufficient. He needs more air defense, but because of the thousands of missiles, as you were reporting, that are being shot at Ukraine on a regular basis, the math is such that you have to be able to go into Russia and take out the facilities that they're using to produce these weapons and the capabilities that they have to shoot these missiles into Ukraine. It was interesting because if you notice in the speech, he's not talking about that he needs some new weapon system or that there's some strategy that Russia's putting them at risk for, or that even that his own people are incapable of fighting. He says that it's the restrictions that are being placed on him at the White House that pose the greatest risk and threat to Ukraine being able to survive and win. Is that a NATO position or is that a U.S. position? Well, it is the restrictions are U.S. They're from the White House. Even Secretary General Stoltenberg of NATO has called for the restrictions to be released, and it would allow them to hit valid military targets in Russia, which would change the dynamics of the fight and give Ukraine a chance. There's a lot of anxiety at NATO. I don't need to tell you this about Donald Trump. Only last night, he said, well, I didn't even know what NATO was. I'm paraphrasing. And again, criticized the Europeans. Europeans have stepped up. During the supplemental, they came up with $50 billion when we did not. They come up with the 60 or whatever. And during that period also, or over the last couple of years, they've gone from 9 countries reaching the 2% of GDP contribution to 23 out of the 32, and 2 of the newest members. So, so far, it's not Europe that is not stepping up. They could do more. But what about Donald Trump and his continuing criticism of NATO? Does that worry you? He's the front runner now. When NATO set its target of defense spending at 2% at the Wales summit, at that time only 3 nations in NATO satisfied that requirement. And Trump brought it up to 9. And I think that his continued hounding and the fact that you even had Secretary General Stoltenberg take up this charge. He gave every speech he would give on the current status of NATO. He would challenge his members to come up to that 2% mark. Makes a difference. And Donald Trump is as hard a negotiator. And by pressuring Europe to step up to the plate, I think they are. But he does get out of other agreements, and he has threatened to leave NATO. And the NATO allies are understandably very nervous about this election. I don't think he's actually threatened to leave NATO. I think he's talked about whether or not people are adequately funding that each of the countries would be looked at in their participation. And I should say he's also praised Vladimir Putin and said, if they don't step up, let Putin, do what he wants with them. I think the core here of the issue is you can look at Donald Trump's record. During the time that he was president, he actually increased U.S. spending at NATO, for NATO, also put more troops in Europe than were there previously, and gave lethal weapons to Ukraine that had not been given under the prior administration. So if you look at what has happened, in addition to the pressure that he put on the Europeans, NATO actually came out at a better place at the end of his presidency than before. What about his embrace of Vladimir Putin? I don't think he's embraced Vladimir Putin either. I think he has adequately evaluated that this is a real foe and that he has real capabilities. And I also think that he has a very clear understanding that Russia is our adversary. They intend to do us harm. They intend to do our allies harm. I was in Helsinki when he came down on the side of Putin, that Putin said this, so why should we not believe him? It inspired the head of national intelligence to have to put out a statement because he was disavowing his own intelligence assessments
the American intelligence assessments against the assessment of the Russian leaders sitting next to him?
Well, I think the crux that certainly when it comes to Donald Trump, that you have to look at what he does, not just what he says. And certainly if you look at what he did over the 4-year term of his presidency, he actually increased our participation in NATO. And I think NATO came out a stronger organization during his presidency.
Are you concerned right now about, the situation with this election? I mean, what do you see with the leader of the free world, Joe Biden, as challenged as he is? What's your read on it?
Yeah, and he really is. I mean, it is very unfortunate.
And you're a Republican, so.
Right. But I've been in the White House where he has struggled in meetings, and I have great concerns about his ability to do the job when people walk into his office with an ongoing crisis. I think, in fact, some of the difficulty we're seeing with Ukraine is a result of the president's diminished capacity, because a lot of the decisions that need to be made, where President Zelenskyy is saying, well, remove these restrictions, allow me to move forward, make certain that you're going to give me F-16s, but you're not giving me the pilot training. All of these issues that could easily be resolved are all gummed up at the White House, and I think it's because they can't just make a decision.